Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross, and I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I'm so glad you could join us tonight for tonight's GPS important program on preparing for the SAT test. And we'll also be talking about keeping a perspective about the SAT test and a healthy approach. I know this is a challenging time for families, and I know you will gain some good information tonight that will help you and your family around this time. I do want to make mention that our YouTube, Glenbard Parent Series YouTube channel, is filled with resources about past programs that we have hosted on this topic. And we will post those in the chat, but you'll find there programs like Ron Lieber's program about the biggest decision your family will ever make a healthy approach to paying for college. There are programs where Frank Palmisani has in the past come and talked about financial aid. Recently, we hosted Jeff Salingo, Who Gets In and Why, a year inside college admissions. You'll find on that YouTube channel a segment he did for us for WGN Television News and some of the Q&A from his program. So do take a look at all of the programming that's there on our YouTube channel. We're so happy you could join us tonight. Families near and far are welcome. We know we host not only Glenbard families, and we're delighted about that. Our ask of you is to please share this resource. Like us on social media, check us out on Instagram, and do please share. The format tonight, you will be hearing from our speaker, Matt Pietrafetta from Academic Approach. He will be introduced by Mike Fumagalli, our Assistant Director of Teaching and Learning at Glenbard. Matt will speak for about 45 minutes, and then please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will try our best to get to all of them. You saw the sponsor slide. We're so grateful to those people who make this opportunity available, and we're so grateful to all of you for coming. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Fumagalli. Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Gilda. So good to see everybody this evening. Thank you for being here with us. It's my privilege to introduce Matt Pietrafetta. He founded Academic Approach in 2001 and currently serves as their Chief Executive Officer. Since 2001, Matthew has supervised the organization's instructional services, curriculum, and technology development, whether working with lead trainers to provide high quality support to Academic Approach's tutors, or collaborating with educators to deliver instructional support that drives higher student achievement. Matthew is committed to improving the quality of Academic Approach's instructional practices and services. After earning his Ph.D. from Columbia University in New York, Matt taught in their core curriculum. And while preparing New York high school city students for college entrance exams, Matt worked to define a model of test preparation based on less strategy and more skills development. Academic Approach views test preparation as a means to an academic end, teaching vital college readiness skills that not only raise scores, but also prepare students for academic success, both on and beyond the test. Matt, it is an absolute privilege to have you here this evening. Glenbard is incredibly grateful for our partnership with Academic Approach. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Fumagalli. Thank you, Gilda, so much. Thank you, Glenbard families, for having me here tonight. I'm Matthew Pietrafetta, the founder of Academic Approach. We are partners with your school district in providing services, specifically SAT preparation courses. We'll talk about this. They'll be starting after the first of the year. It's a service that is free to district students, and that we've taken great pleasure in working with Mr. Fumagalli and his team to provide flexible solutions on the campuses that can deliver high quality skill-based test preparation to your students. So I'm the founder of Academic Approach. I'll be presenting information tonight, resources for you to empower you as parents to work with your students and navigate them through the process. But I'm also the head of the organization that partners with the district to provide direct SAT test preparation services. So we'll speak about those tonight as well. The agenda for this evening is largely going to come from information in a document called Understanding the College entrance exams, a personalized approach that you can access at www.academicapproach.com/online learning resources. And if you go there and put in your email and your information, you can download the document. You don't need it for tonight's presentation. You can download it later. I'm taking snapshots in this presentation, which we will share with you from that larger document, which has a lot of resource material for you. But I want to offer it to you as a free resource to help you navigate the way, the road ahead for your students, and have all the kind of informational resources at the tip of your fingers in this document. And I'll pull some pages from it tonight for this presentation. We're going to go through, in terms of our topics tonight, first some myth busting. I want to get over some misconceptions, definitely lower the heat in the room. Gilda was talking about the stress and anxiety that has always been there around standardized testing and the college admissions process, which can be quite overwhelming for families and students, but even more so coming out of what we've just been through over the past 2 years and the stress and the anxiety and trauma of the experiences that we've had. So we want to, as responsible adults, colleagues together, parents ourselves, we want to mitigate the anxiety, bring the temperature down in the room. And tonight is about providing rational information. I'm so grateful to the Parent Series, to Gilda, to Michael, to invite me here tonight, because information is empowering. It doesn't have to be anxiety producing. If we're empowered with the information, we can get over certain myths. We can use that information responsibly to guide our students and not be, reading parents send me links to different websites and message boards and so forth. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So a great thing about a night like tonight and having the resources and district leadership that you have is you can get accurate information. You can have it at the right time. You don't need to be anxious. You're in great hands, great college counseling in the district to guide you through. And tonight's just another effort to give you that kind of information that can empower you. So I'll go through some myths and bust them. We're going to talk about the ACT and the SAT. While the SAT is Illinois state mandated exam, and every high school student must take it, public high school student must take it in spring of junior year, and you'll take it in the district in March. There is also an ACT test that colleges will also accept. And so I want to inform you about the differences between the two exams, let you know how your children can have access to both. They'll most certainly have a state mandated exam that they must take in the spring of their junior year, the SAT. That's Illinois state exam. But you can also take the ACT, and for some students, they do find it more favorable, and we'll talk about that tonight. I'll also focus on whether you're prepared for either test, the SAT or the ACT or both, if there are great learning opportunities in the process if we approach it as an academically enriching undertaking. I'll really focus on taking a healthy approach, working with the district, all the great programming and leadership they're providing. Talk a little bit about academic approach in our partnership, and then leave time for Q&A at the end. So in terms of myth busting, let's dive right in, dispelling some of the most common standardized testing myths. Number one, and you'll see a pattern to my Q&A here. Test scores are the most influential factor that drives a college admissions counselor's decision to admit a student. Absolutely, unequivocally false. What is, it is most certainly grades, not scores, that matter most. And why does this make sense? If you think about it from a data standpoint, a standardized test, while it can be meaningful and can provide context for a student's college readiness, is a snapshot in time, 3 hours on a Saturday morning. Whereas your GPA, your grades, are the product of 3+ years of sustained work in the academic classroom. That's a much better data set, more complete to judge a student by. In the document that I mentioned, Understanding College Admissions Tests, on page 5, there's a detail from NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, which shows it is grades in all courses and grades in college prep courses and the strength of your curriculum by far that are the most meaningful drivers of your college admissions. So, simple point, don't overstress the tests. Focus on success in the classroom, focus on what your teachers are asking of you students, focus on being a great student every day, go to office hours, do extra credit work. That's what's going to drive. And of course, if you do that well, it will enrich your skills. It will also, should you be taking the standardized tests and applying to college with them, that will improve that performance as well. So grades first. Standardized testing scores are required to apply to college. Once again, you'll see a pattern in this true and false. Also false. There are over 1,000 schools that are test optional. That is, you can apply with your grade transcript, which matters most, as we said, but without a standardized testing score and still be evaluated by those schools. If you go to fairtest.org, you get a complete list of these test optional schools. Now, having said that, the SAT still is a graduation requirement in the state of Illinois, so you must take it. You must take it, and it is reported, by the school to the state that all their students have taken the tests, and we do look at those scores in terms of helping to understand the performance of schools across the districts in Illinois. But you don't need to necessarily submit that SAT score while you need to take it. You don't need to necessarily submit it to colleges because some colleges are test optional. On page 6, we go into this, how this, the test optional movement that would have been around for years really got a lot of extra support during the pandemic because simply students could not have safe and fair access and equitable access to testing centers. So many colleges adopted test optional and increased the movement. Some even went, like the University of California school system, test blind. They don't even want to look at standardized testing scores. So there are schools for you if you do not want to be submitting a standardized testing score to colleges. Cool, I jumped ahead. True or false? If you apply to East Coast schools, you must take the SAT because the SAT is required. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, only knew the SAT and only took it when I was a young man. Since those days when the SAT was kind of an East Coast test and the ACT was a Midwest, Iowa-based test, those days are gone. If schools are looking for standardized testing scores, they will accept either the SAT or the ACT. You do not need to take one or the other. Now, I didn't mention again, I'll keep reiterating, Illinois is an SAT-aligned state. It's a high school graduation requirement, so all 11th graders must take it. But in terms of college admissions, colleges who are looking for a standardized testing score will accept either the SAT or the ACT. No bias, no regionalism. It's your choice in the admissions process. So that's why some of this presentation tonight is particularly pertinent, because you should be empowered to know about the ACT, the SAT, their similarities and differences, so you can guide your child in addition to taking that SAT, in junior year, to possibly exploring an ACT if that's a favorable test for them as well. True or false, and this is an interesting one, a student's test scores will always correlate perfectly well to that student's GPA. So they're an A student or B student, so you see an A score or a B score. That is not true, and it's not true for a couple of important reasons. 2 reasons. One, these tests are summative of many years of academic material. And this is important. They're testing 7th through 11th grade curriculum. So when your student takes a practice test, a PSAT, a practice ACT, or anything, and you get it back, and sometimes there's shock and awe that, oh my gosh, those scores don't look as compelling or as impressive as the student's GPA. Well, that shouldn't necessarily be terribly surprising, because sometimes students may have forgotten much of the material they had mastered in 7th, 8th, and 9th, 10th grade by the time they're a junior. So that score may be reflective of a need, what we call in test preparation, our test preparation, of spiraling back material that had previously been learned and remastering it. That's not necessarily such a tall order, reminding students of things they once knew. So it's no cause for panic, just cause for review. Second, which we'll focus on a little later in the presentation, the learning opportunity section, is a point that's very near and dear to my heart as an educator, something I think is very important to train students to be prepared for, is that the tests will often present that academic material in unfamiliar ways. And what some students have to learn to do is what we call transfer their skills onto new, unfamiliar presentations of the material the SAT or ACT may present. I'll show you some of these later, but there's a great opportunity in preparing students there to help them become more flexible, more resilient problem solvers that can take their core academic skills and apply those skills to a variety of novel problem types and be successful. So you're either spiraling back some old stuff they once knew but forgot, or you're teaching them how to apply their skills onto novel material that may look a little bit different, but we can acclimate them to be successful. And that's part of what our SAT test preparation courses will be doing for students in the district. So now on to the next section, the ACT or the SAT, which would you prefer? And as parents, I'd like you to kind of go through this section with me empathetically, thinking of yourself when you were 16, 17, thinking of your child going through this process and navigating these tests, and trying to think about, if I were assessed this way on this material, in this format, which test would I prefer? Because one of the things that you can help your child do is determine, in addition to that mandatory SAT they will take in 11th grade, should they also try the ACT for this or that reason. And this presentation and the resource that you can download along with this PowerPoint will equip you to be helpful guides to your students through that process and thinking it through. So first things first, let's take a 20,000 foot perspective on the test and what's on them. And what you'll notice is we have tests that at the highest level are pretty similar. On the ACT side, we have English, which is grammar. We have math, 7th through 11th grade curriculum, reading comprehension, passage-based reading, and we have a science section that deals with experimental data, and then an optional essay. On the SAT side, we have evidence-based reading and writing, which has subsections of reading, just like ACT, writing and language, grammar, just like ACT English, a couple math sections and no calculator and a calculator, and there's no essay on the SAT. They got rid of it a few years ago. But a couple differences you might start to see, which could affect the way a student experiences these tests. Number one, well, there's a little friend over here on the ACT side called science, which doesn't show up on the SAT side. If science is a preferred topic, students enjoy it, this is a favorable thing on the ACT. If it's not preferred, it's not a favorable thing, and they may enjoy the SAT, which doesn't have it. You'll also notice something else. It's interesting. Testing time, 2 hours and 55 minutes for the ACT, 215 questions total. 3 hours for the SAT, 154 questions. That's interesting. 5 more minutes and considerably fewer questions for the SAT. It is a slower test. You have more time on the SAT. In fact, you have 45% more time per question on the on the SAT than you do on the ACT. So the SAT is a slower test. If your student likes to kind of go a little more slowly, not breeze through material, but kind of plod along, the SAT does give more time per question. So at a high level, you start to notice some things right away. Science on the ACT, no science on the SAT. More time per question on the SAT, a little faster on the ACT. As we move on, order matters. The structure of the test can affect student test-taking psychology. It can affect how they feel about the test, whether they like their experience or don't like their experience. So on the SAT, we begin with a reading section, 65 minutes long, pretty long. Then writing and language, grammar. Then you end with your 2 math sections, one with no calculator, one with calculator. If math is a non-preferred topic, and you get a little tired by the end of that 3rd hour, and you're ending with math, that may not be such a great experience for your student. If you look at the ACT, you start with English, the grammar. You then go on to 1 math section. It's a long 160 minutes, but it's second. Then you have a shorter reading, and then you end with the science. Well, if science is non-preferred, you're always going to end with that science on ACT. So that's something to wrestle with. But if math is a little bit more non-preferred and you'd rather do that second when you're fresh rather than 2 sections at the end when you're not, that can make a difference and be more favorable for the ACT. So I want to give you this information so you can have healthy, constructive conversations with your child as they go through it, help match them to a preferred exam. Yes, they'll have to take the SAT, but they may also want to take an ACT if we think it could feature them favorably as well. In our resource, there's a great composite score comparison and concordance table. The highest score you can get on the SAT is 1600. The highest on the ACT is 3600. There's a table that shows you how to compare them. What we like to do in the beginning of a program, and we give complimentary practice tests to do this, is take a practice ACT, take a practice SAT, compare them, see which one is graded higher. Sometimes you'll see one is 3 or 4 rungs higher on one side. You just score higher comparatively on one test than the other. And if the student prefers that test too, we call it the double check. Check, this test is more favorable quantitatively. Check, this test is also more favorable qualitatively. The student likes it more for all these different reasons we're discussing. So then we may want to build some support or make sure the student gets in to take that test. If it's the ACT, we know they're taking the SAT in the district. Maybe they also want to take the ACT. If that gets the double check a little higher quantitatively, we'll prefer qualitatively. So these tools in this document can help you kind of make these comparisons, be good guides to your students through the process. Now, funneling down a little bit into a section-by-section experience of the ACT versus SAT to see how this can impact students. When you get into each section in a comparison, it becomes interesting. The ACT and the SAT both have reading sections. They're a little bit different. As we see under testing time, the ACT is 35 minutes. And the SAT is 65 minutes. So if attention and holding in and endurance is a bit of a challenge, that's a long reading section. It takes a lot of attention. However, you'll notice the time per passage is quite different. On the ACT side, you have 8 minutes and 45 seconds to complete a passage with about 10 questions. On the SAT side, you have 13 minutes to complete a passage with about 10 questions. Once again, that point I was making, the SAT is a much slower exam. However, the SAT is not necessarily easier in terms of its reading. It does give you more time, but some of the challenge of the SAT is a little bit of increased rigor. So let me give you an example of this. On the SAT side, on the left-hand column here, you see a type of SAT question that you'll get, which is called a command of evidence question. Section 17 asks you to identify a fact in the passage. Question 18 asks you to find the evidence to support it. Well, now you have to go not only get the right answer, but find the evidence that supports it best. That's a really good test of evidence-based reasoning. Look on the ACT side. They give you the line numbers, 75 through 80. They don't ask you to find the line numbers. They give them to you and they ask you then to interpret them and find the meaning. That's a little bit easier. So while the SAT gives you more time, some of the question types are a little bit more rigorous than the ACT, which gives you less time, but a little less rigor as well. That's important to know. Some students may say, your student may say to you, oh, I really find those ACT passages to be more transparent, a little easier to deal with. The SAT is a little bit dense. Sure, I get extra time, but man, it gives me a headache. So these are things to look for in terms of helping to match your student to the better test. No one would ever pick between the SAT or the ACT, one being preferable to the other, because of the difference between the English and the writing sections, the ACT English and the SAT writing. Why wouldn't they pick? Because they're essentially the same. Yes, they have a different number of questions on them, but the questions themselves are identical. Here's an example. They give you a passage. On the SAT, they underline, there's question 11, they underline a portion of the sentence. They give you options for revision, 4 of them. The first is no change, leave it alone, there's no grammatical problem at all. The next 3 are changes to fix the grammar in case there is a grammatical error. We'll look at the ACT. That looks like the same thing to me. An underlined portion to a sentence. First one is no change. The next 3 are options to revise. So here's the deal. If you're taking the SAT or the ACT, you have to learn some grammar. You have to learn what a run-on sentence is, what a comma splice is, how to fix it, semicolon. These are good things to learn before you go off to college and become a college-ready writer. It's a great review, immediately helps students become more competent, confident proofreaders and copy editors of their own writing. But you have to learn it for both tests. So we're not choosing on that basis. They're pretty much identical. The math, however, you could see a student make a choice. 60 questions on the ACT, 50 on the SAT, 60 minutes on the ACT, 80 minutes on the SAT. There's that theme again, more time on the SAT. However, here's that theme again, a little bit more rigor on the SAT. There's a no calculator section. If you don't mind grinding out some algebraic problem solving by hand and you don't need your calculator, then that's fine by you. If you're a little bit calculator dependent in your math and you really like to check using a calculator as a tool, you're going to prefer the ACT because you can use the calculator on every single question. There is a no calculator section on the SAT and not on the ACT. Then there's also a calculator section on the SAT as well because you have those 2 sections. So there's a little snapshot of an ACT math section. Questions, multiple choice, you can use your calculator all the time. SAT, a little different. Here's the no calculator section. Notice that calculator with a big X through it. Can't use it here. So you have to grind out your algebra. They also have another treat. They have something called the grid-in section, or student-produced responses, where they do not offer you multiple choice at all. You have to grid into bubbles what the answer is. If it's 3/5, you have to, grid in 3/5 for 3/5. No multiple choice at all. There's that SAT with a little bit more rigor. Takes the calculator away, takes the multiple choice away, but does give you more time. And then, of course, the most conspicuous difference, science. ACT has a science section, 40 questions, 35 minutes. It's the last section of the ACT. SAT does not have a science section. It has science-related questions across the multiple sections, but does not have a science section. So if science is preferred, this is a benefit to your student. They'll like the ACT because they can show off their preference for science. If it is non-preferred, they may prefer the SAT because they don't have to have a dedicated science reasoning section on it. What does it look like? It's experimental data. It's not testing content knowledge, like what's the definition of mitosis versus meiosis in biology, but rather here's some experimental data. Can you use passages, tables, and charts to answer some data questions, basically analyzing the data presentations? It's reading comprehension, but with data presentation. So it's a lot like the reading section, not necessarily testing science knowledge, curriculum knowledge, but rather science reasoning and reading skills. Which test features a mandatory essay? Neither. The SAT eliminated its essay, and the ACT essay is optional these days. Most colleges don't even want it. So it's really the multiple choice sections that we're concerned about for the most part on these tests. The ACT does, if you do choose to take the essay, it basically gives 3 prompts on some sort of controversial topic. And this one, it's on intelligent machines. Are intelligent machines good for society or bad? There's 3 perspectives. Whether they're good or bad, you have to read them, respond to them, and craft your own opinion. So it's a persuasive essay using some perspectives that are offered on a controversial topic. So with that in mind, you can kind of take a deep breath for a moment, sit back, and think, with those differences, when you were a 17-year-old parent, what would you have preferred? What would you like? Was there something that's more non-preferred or preferred on a given test? What do you know about your child over years of their education? What are their preferred topics? What are their non-preferred? How do they tend to read? At what rate? Would they enjoy that extra time? Or are they kind of pretty efficient and like to move through things quickly? These are considerations that we take on in a section of the document that you can download called Personalized Pathways of Learning, choosing which test is right for you. We help families through this decision all the time, but this resource can help you moderate this conversation in your own family. So, here's 2 students in a case study, each have an ACT of 26. It's their composite score. But if you look at their subsections, they're opposite. Student on the left has an English of 32. Student on the right has an English of 20. Student on the left has a math of 20. Student on the right has a math of 32. It all averages out to the same 26, but they're very different 26s in terms of how they need support and how they need guidance and what they need to work on. So this section helps you kind of go through figuring out where your student sits. And it also provides a decision-making guide. You can actually go through, so a practice ACT and a practice SAT, and go through this decision-making list and put checks, and then add up your number of checks and say, oh, wow, the way I answered those questions, it looks like SAT was my favorite or ACT was my favorite. So this is a way to have rational, mediated conversations using quantitative and qualitative analysis with your children to try to find the right fit. Everyone's taken that SAT in the spring of junior year, but it doesn't mean you couldn't also, if it's favorable and desirable, to sit for an ACT as well on any of the national test dates, which we also describe in the document. Families have to register for them themselves. The district takes care of the SAT that's mandated for all 11th graders. But then there are national test dates families can register for on their own, pay for it on their own, register on their own at national testing sites throughout the state. And there are about 7 a year that each of the test organizations offer, ACT and SAT. So I'll now move into the learning opportunity, transferable skills. As an educator who's been working in this space for 25 years, who still run Academic Approach, it's turned 20 years old this past July, so I've been doing this work for a long time. And I still actively tutor students and love doing it. This is the part that I think is interesting. And there's a lot of cynicism, and deservedly so, around standardized testing, and the admissions process I know can be filled with all sorts of controversies. I get it. But if we can, as parents and educators, see the learning opportunity, it helps us kind of see a part in helping students navigate through this in an enriching, academically meaningful way. So it's very easy to get caught up in the cynicism, but what I'd like to focus on in the next few slides is where there's a learning opportunity. And, I'm not trying to dispute the critics. I'm just trying to take a fresh, more constructive approach to, if students are going through this, how do we support them? How do we help them see that there can be meaning and that they can further their college readiness through the process? And I'll go back to that point that I began with, where I see the learning opportunity. Well, it goes back to that myth about, the GPA equaling the standardized testing score. Why doesn't it always? Because sometimes a great student doesn't equal a great test taker. And we're all familiar with this. And why? Back to those two reasons. Because these tests test 7th through 11th grade skills in English, math, reading, and science, and students might have forgotten them. That's number one. Number two, and this is what I want to get into, the tests assess those skills in often unfamiliar, challenging ways under great time pressure. And that can be an opportunity for students to learn how to be more flexible and efficient in problem solving with novel material. So I'll give you a great little anecdote on how this is true in education, and an opportunity for all teachers to teach students how to be more flexible problem solvers, not just when dealing with standardized tests. The example comes from a physics classroom. I call this little anecdote from the tower to the hole. In a physics classroom, a teacher presented during the course of the semester the first problem. A ball weighing 3 kilograms is dropped from the top of a 100-meter tower. How many seconds does it take to reach the ground? Taught the students the effect of gravity on a falling object in the formula, thought the students had it. And then on the final exam, put the second problem. There's a 100-meter hole in the ground, not a tower this time, but a hole in the ground. A ball weighing 3 kilograms is rolled off the side into the hole. How long does it take to reach the bottom? And much to the physics teacher's chagrin, students responded after the test saying this test was not fair. We never had any hole problems. And what's interesting about the anecdote is it helps to identify an important aspect of learning, which is you have to learn to transfer your skills from the way that they were taught to you to novel, different problems. So even though you learned it in context of a tower, well, we're still within the Earth's atmosphere, so gravity is probably the same. So if I drop it in a hole versus the tower, probably the effect of gravity is the same. I should probably use that formula my teacher taught me. But sometimes students get really intimidated by the unfamiliar. And you hear things like this. He gets A's in class, but he's a horrible test taker. She knows most of her stuff, but she gets to the test and freaks out. Students will say sometimes to me even, I took that practice test and I'd never seen problems like that before. They'll say to teachers, I've never seen anything like that in class before. But our goal is to cultivate, and the tests are very good at doing this, students who are flexible and can apply their skills to novel problems. And it's not that the test was impossible, it's probably that it was unfamiliar. So one of the opportunities in preparing students for these sorts of tests and academic performance in general is to help to cultivate flexible, resilient problem solvers that can transfer their skills. So I want to give you an example of so you can empathize with your students about how the tests are very good at putting us into these challenging situations of needing to transfer our skills. I'm going to present to you 3 English items briefly and 3 math items. They're taken all from an ACT that we administered to thousands of students over the years, and we aggregated all their data, same testing cohort, same test, same items. And we noticed some really interesting patterns within the same test, same students, over the course of going through those items. So this first one is from the ACT English. It's a grammar item. It holds the world's record for the underwater dash, comma. It's probably as wary of your unfamiliar size, shape, and smell as you are of its speed. Well, this is a staple of the grammar test. They love this. It's called the run-on sentence. It's a comma splice. That puny little comma is too weak to do the job of connecting the 2 independent clauses. You need something stronger. Well, the only one that presents the solution that does it, fixes the run-on, is J, because it's using a coordinating conjunction, but fanboy's word, students will call it for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are the magic words. And that fixes it. So let's see how many students arrived at that answer. Within this testing population, 60% did. 60% got it right. Within the same test, we move on. Okay, this sentence. Though engineering projects have shrunk the plat and thus have in reality drastically reduced the crane's habitat, comma, each year they return, messengers of spring and a land just emerging from a bitter winter. Well, we have a dependent clause, though engineering projects, blah, 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 all the way up to the comma. Then we have an independent clause, each year they return, messengers of the spring, that's a standalone sentence. Commas, perfectly good piece of punctuation to connect a dependent clause with an independent clause. But what do they do this time? It's still sentence construction, still the same skill from the previous item. But look what they threw in the answer choice. Oh gosh, gee, a semicolon, a period, a comma, and. Maybe I'm confused about a semicolon. How do I use that? Students start getting intimidated. Even though it's pretty much the same skill, the test is making the sentence, test writers are making the sentence a little longer, adding a little more complexity. And that same testing cohort drops from 60% accuracy on a sentence construction item, same kind of set of skills, to 24% accuracy. Same test, same students. We get to a nice juicy one. Beverly Harvard, the chief of police in Atlanta, and the first African-American woman to lead a major city's police department, dash, began her career. So we have Beverly Harvard, dash, and then after department, dash, began her career in law enforcement in an unusual way, colon, to answer a challenge made by her husband. When students learn the colon, they learn that this is a perfect use of the colon. You have an independent clause to the left, raises a question. What was that unusual way? Colon, you can put anything to the right. Phrase, a list, an independent clause, anything you like, as long as it answers the previous question. And this does to answer a challenge made by her husband. It's still sentence construction, but the sentence got longer. They threw in dashes, they threw in colons. And the same testing population, same test, dropped to 17% accuracy. So my point here is that it's a set of skills that we want students to have as writers. But what the test is very good at doing is taking things just beyond the comfort zone, just beyond the level of familiarity, and adding a little bit of complexity. Once the students review semicolons and colons, they're going to be fine. But they may need to fill in a little pocket of skill here or there to help prepare them for these unfamiliar question types. It's not that they're not capable. It's not that they're not as strong on these tests or can be as they are in their classroom performance. It's that they may have forgotten some things, and we may have to just kind of, freshen them up on things they've forgotten and present some things that they've maybe not yet mastered to make them more familiar. Just briefly, I'll do this very, very quickly without spending too much time on math. Same test, same students, a nice little familiar triangle area problem. Most students know it. 5 by 6 rectangle cut across a diagonal. I won't draw it out for you, but the triangle is half the area of the rectangle. 5 by 6, 5 times 6, 30 divided by 2, 15. How are our students doing on triangle knowledge? Let's see, pretty good. About half of them, 48% got this right. Within the same test, same students. We move on to, a rhombus. That's kind of scary. And they tell me that AC is 10 and BD is 12. However, if I really could transfer my triangle knowledge and understood that a triangle is 1/2 of the area of a rectangle, wasn't this just a big rectangular 10 by 12 region and the triangles are within it? So maybe it's just 10 times 12, 120 divided by 2, 60. You should be able to transfer that. But if I'm intimidated by the word rhombus, or I forgot that it's just a couple triangles, then I may not get this. And sure enough, I dropped from 48% accuracy to 23. Same skills, really. Triangle area is at the heart of this, but they made it a little bit unfamiliar. They threw in a scary word, rhombus. Last one within the same test, triangular prism. Oh my gosh, it's volume now. They want the volume of this figure, and I'm panicking because I don't know what the volume of a triangular prism is. Well, let's think about it. I know what triangle area is. That face right there, 4 times 3 divided by 2, that's 12 divided by 2, that's 6. And then you have this third dimension. Well, let me think. Let me be flexible. Let me be resilient. What am I going to do with that 10? Add it, maybe. Subtract it, probably not. Divide by it doesn't really make sense. This is volume. It's probably going to be big. Multiply by it, sure. Maybe I'll try that. 60. Well, how many picked that? 17%. They knew the triangle area, but they couldn't really transfer it onto related but slightly unfamiliar problems. This is what you can teach students, make them more flexible, more resilient. So when you see those scores, when they come back and they may be a little lower than you wanted, you don't need to panic. What does a student need to review that they forgot? And can they get some preparation maybe on some unfamiliar topics that they just haven't been exposed to yet, so they can bridge their good skills to some of the presentations that show up on the test? Our view is that there's a learning opportunity there. And it's helpful to really focus on these rigorous items to show them to students, because if they practice the right level of rigor and apply those skills under test conditions and practice a bit, we see higher academic performance all the time. I did have an opportunity in Inside Higher Ed to write a piece called Standardized Tests Can Promote Rigor, where I do try to make these arguments about the fact that test preparation, when approached in a healthy way, in a balanced way, grades first, classroom first, test preparation second, that it can actually promote flexible, resilient, rigorous problem solving because you're taking on challenging items and you're learning to apply your skills. And I think if we could look at it that way and avoid some of the cynicism while our students are going through it, if they're going through it, it helps them, you know, adolescents are already cynical enough sometimes. It helps them kind of be a little more positive about this opportunity to grow their skills and to navigate this rite of passage. So I will now move into the ending of the presentation, get ready for Q&A. A healthy approach to standardized testing. There's so much can be overwhelming. PSATs, ACTs, SATs, oh my. You're in a great district. You have excellent expert college counseling team that will be navigating you through and giving you information. Presentations like this and information, resources to read and consume in consultation with the district and our partnership with the district. Once again, academic success in the classroom first. That's the number one priority, and that will transfer over to test performance first and foremost. And then if necessary, supplement with test preparation, what we're providing for the district, which I'll talk about in a second. You can take practice tests with us complimentary, sometimes after the course, or at some point, some people like to supplement with a little one-on-one instruction to try to fill in some gaps. These are, we provide the service, other groups provide the service. There's multiple ways to get resources, some free within the district for you, others that you can pursue as families. About academic approaches, briefly founded it in July of 2001, have been committed to teaching and helping students grow scores through skills-based test preparation for years. We're experienced with ACT and SAT and really proud to be partners with the district to support your student success. We have three main phrases that we kind of operate by. Number one, tests are standardized, students are not. So that's why we focus on trying to personalize your approach. Yes, you will all take the SAT in 11th grade, in the spring of 11th grade. However, there may be some considerations about what's best for your child in addition to that, possibly taking an ACT, possibly focusing on specific skill building in certain areas. Skill-based test preparation, let's make the skills transfer beyond the test into academic performance. I believe firmly that you can increase your competence as a student through targeted skills-based test preparation that help raise the score, but also make you feel more competent with skills. And we call that teaching beyond the test. Our partnership with the district, there'll be more information about this, but starting in January, we're offering SAT classes that are free to families within the district. We're offering them, we'll have a schedule to release with detail on the days of the week that we're on the different campuses, and we'll have some remote options as well. We are also offering a special promotion to families that are interested in academic preparation and so forth, discounts to students in the district as well. We want to be flexible, accessible partners, so if you're ever interested in that, you can inquire. And at this point then, I will open it up to Q&A, eager to hear your questions. And thank you for your time.
Matt, I always learn from you. Thank you so much. And you reminded me of something I want to mention before we get to the Q&A. Very often we'll hear from parents, I'm very motivated about this test. How do I get my child motivated about this test? And we'll go there in a minute, but I do want to make mention of the fact that next week, Wednesday, November 17th, we're going to be hosting, actually, Ned Johnson, who has a test prep company. You may be familiar with him in Washington, D.C., and William Stixrud. They are the authors of a book called How to Talk with Kids to Build Stress Tolerance, Motivation, and a Happy Home. They were with us before on their first book, The Self-Driven Child, and now they're back to talk about how do you say those words. That program will be at noon and 7 p.m. that night on the 17th. And then you can see what's coming up in December while I have your attention. Positive thinking for teens on the 1st, and then a program on the importance of friendship. So yes, now let's talk about motivation and happy home. And so Mike, why don't you start with the first question?
Hey, Matt, thanks again so much. What a tremendous presentation. You really just captured all of the things that are important to know about getting ready for the spring. And so thank you again for your partnership. It's a wonderful opportunity for us at Glenbard. We couldn't be more thrilled with that. So just a couple of questions here just to stimulate thought and get some discussion going. Again, certainly please feel free to submit questions either through the Q&A or the chat. We're monitoring both. Myself and Matt are happy to answer questions. I'm happy to answer questions about the Glenbard program. Matt is happy to answer more generalized questions. But Matt, let's get us started here. You talked a little bit about, you made mention of test-taking psychology, right? That it's a real thing. And you kind of spent some time talking about, with regards to some parameters, SAT can be a little bit more of a favorable test, like in terms of more time per question. But in thinking about preparing students for the test and subsequently giving them confidence, right? A big aspect of our program that we deploy at Glenbard is we want to prepare students by helping to shore up their skills, but we certainly also want to develop confidence in them and confidence to take this test. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between confidence and performance when it comes to high stakes exams, particularly like the SAT and things of that nature?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so confidence is critical. And it seems like a soft kind of goal, but it's not. It's really very much the process of an educational scaffolding for the student that gets them to the point of being confident. And to your point, like, the skill building is first. So what do I need? It's just like in a sport, you kind of have to practice how you're going to play. What's the event that I'm going to be in? How long is the match or the game or the meet or whatever? And then how am I practicing to get my skills in place, my endurance in place, so I can perform under those circumstances? So confidence comes from having that intentional process of building skills and strategies for a particular event. So that's educational. What is this event? Let's first of all demystify things about it. First, you have to get students over like a lot of misconceptions about the test. Sometimes a lot of static thinking, like, oh, I'm not good at this, I'm only good at that. And that self-stereotyping is a killer to confidence because, by the time students get to 16, 17, sometimes they've formed maybe in middle school years some self-stereotypes, like I'm a math person, I'm not a math person, whatever it may be. And say, no. Let's not put yourself into some sort of static mentality, but more into a growth-minded mentality of where am I now and where am I going and how do I get there? Being more specific about analyzing, oh, it's not that you're bad at math, it's that you made mistakes with these geometry items. And to my point earlier, when did you take geometry? Oh, you took it over a year ago. You forgot some of this stuff. That's not bad at math. That's having forgotten these geometry items. So moving them beyond the static thinking, helping them understand what they're preparing for, and then being specific in the guidance to help them get there can really grow confidence. But with adolescents, it's difficult because there's a lot of anxiety, as we were talking about earlier. We want to mitigate it. We want to move away from the self-stereotyping, the static thinking, and cultivate growth mindset, that you can change anything over time. You can do anything you want to do with the right kind of proper preparation.
Yeah, wow. What a tremendous way to think about it, right? Especially when we can make the connections between preparation, confidence, and performance makes a really big difference, right? Yeah. Can you also, so one of the things that I've seen you do this presentation a couple of different times in different circumstances, right? And one of the things that I'm always kind of struck by is as you go through some of the examples, I'm like, man, I don't know if I can answer that question, right? And because so much time has elapsed since I kind of shored up my skills and with regards to particular areas of specific content. And so can you talk a little bit about, you touched on it in answering the last question, but just kind of like that shoring up of skills, whether it be algebra, geometry, like in what ways does that benefit a student in preparing for a test like the SAT, and also related to like beyond the test, right? Academic approach uses that terminology. And so can you talk a little bit about just the shoring up of some of those skills and how we tighten some of those things up and help to prepare our students for the test, and how the course itself, that academic approach deploys, does that?
Absolutely. And two responses to that. Number one, and this is so helpful for students to see, is that while there are 215 questions in the ACT and 154 on the SAT, they aren't testing 215 different skills or 154 different skills. That example of sentence construction I was using where you have to understand how to fix, a run-on sentence and how to use just a couple pieces of punctuation to do it, commas, semicolons, and colons. They're going to test that 15 times out of 75 questions on the English. So if you can show students, and this is how we design our courses, that there are some high impact skills that if you master this lesson family, let's call it, it's going to reverberate out across a bunch of items. So you get a big bang for your investment of instructional time, student. And students they're busy. We don't want to overwhelm them. This needs to be efficient. So if they can see that, that's really helpful. The other way to build purpose is invariably students will see, they'll remember the time that they got a paper back from a teacher and had some red ink on it. And the red ink, maybe it's a different color because teachers don't like to use red this much, these days, but there's some corrections. And yeah, I never understood that, but my teacher was saying I had these fragments or these run-on sentences, and I was a little afraid to ask. And then you say, oh, no, let's talk about that. Now this can help you in the classroom, beyond the test. And now you can feel comfortable maybe going into office hours and asking the teacher with your next draft, hey, did I correct all those fragments? I think I know what they are now. So there's a way to get a nice partnership. I see myself as a colleague to the great educators in your district. And I'm just trying to be there to be part of a large holistic effort of parents, educators, supplementary service providers like ourselves to help the whole child's development. And I think, and so, to the student feeling that, wow, there's a small set of skills that have a big impact on my score. And the small set of skills, these power skills, they're also actually relevant to my academics. So now I'm in trig now, but if I clarify that geometry stuff that I'd forgotten, it's actually going to help me with trig because that's related to the trig that I'm doing too. So I'm getting better at I call it the both and, both my scores are going up and my classroom confidence and skills are going up too. I'm always looking for the both and.
One of the things that you touched on there was this continuity of instruction, right? And that's one of the aspects of the program that we deploy at Glenbard is we have students attending the same cohort weekly with their peers and developing relationship with their instructor in a way that allows them and gives them a vehicle to be able to have a conversation with the instructor. And, we have, as you know, we have the mastery tracker, right, from week to week in which we're tracking students individually based on certain skills and being able to provide them feedback on those things. So they're able to go to their instructor and have more individual and specific conversations if there's ways that they could expand their own learning. And then, the instructor subsequently also gets a kind of lay of the land for the rest of the cohort as far as, how do we adjust pacing and instruction so that we make sure that students are ready to take the SAT, but we're also taking into consideration the unique learning differences of students in front of us. So I just wanted to that continuity of instruction piece is kind of an essential component of our partnership with you and the program that we deploy. So really grateful for that.
We appreciate that. And the not all, and it's a credit to the families in the district that the district has the educational philosophy it has, because some districts do look at the standardized tests as sort of an island over there. But if you can take an integrated approach, one with the focuses on continuity of instruction, then students can have it integrated in as a skill building component, as the district is doing, to support their overall academic success. That also helps demystify it. It also helps kill some of the cynicism. It also helps build healthy mindset. Oh, this is part of my education, this opportunities to learn. And that's a very, very healthy approach. But it takes great leadership to do that, because it can be a controversial topic. It takes work, as we've had to do as partners, to integrate it in thoughtful ways. And sometimes for some districts, it'd be easier just to kind of turn a blind eye towards it. But it's something, to the extent that students have to kind of go through it, navigate it, to have it integrated into a plan, a holistic plan for children in the district, that's much healthier for them, much healthier for the families. And so it's a credit to the district to be proactive in that way and progressive.
So Matt, I have a question for you, more of a general nature. In terms of the day of the test, those kinds of pointers that you might have for a student.
Yeah, I think it's funny you said because I just had students take the ACT, and the ACT scores are coming back right now from the October ACT. And I always tell them, don't do anything new the night before. Don't do, well, you know, I had a student once years ago who said, hey, I had read an article about, you know, salmon being really good, you know, omega-3 fatty acids. So I ate a bunch of salmon the night before the test, and I was totally sick the next day. And I was like, had you ever eaten salmon before? No. So not a great idea. So don't do anything new. One of the things that we do in the course of the program and all our programs is we have practice tests integrated in. So it's really great to have a dress rehearsal. When you take practice tests, low stakes, don't go on any record, then you can kind of say, okay, did I get the right amount of sleep? Did I get the wrong amount of sleep? Did I eat the right thing? Did I eat the wrong thing? Did I come prepared? Did I forget to do this? You know, and that going through the dress rehearsal, then by the time you do get to game day, you should have been rehearsed. So there's really nothing new. You already kind of have a plan for performance. And that's why in our programs, our one-on-one programs, or our program with the district in terms of classroom, we're always integrating in practice. So students, by the time they get to that official test date, they're rehearsed. It's not new. They kind of know their routine, and that routine, like I said, shouldn't have anything like salmon introduced into it for the first time.
You're also reminding me about, you know, some of those conversations to have with a child, some of the things we've heard from some of our speakers in the past. Recently, one talked about how make the college conversation happen on Sunday night only. And for students, it's really perfectly all right when interested and well-meaning friends and relatives ask you your plans and where you're going. It's perfectly fine to say, well, I know I'm going to college. I'm keeping all my options open. We don't need to go into any specifics. And I think that helps. You know, I recently, when we hosted Jeff Zelenko, he talked about how many colleges, admission counselors have 10 minutes to look at an application. And so are we really going to, let's keep that in perspective. Is there anything else you want to say in terms of keeping that perspective?
You know, I think that piece, you know, is so important about the social emotional, and this becomes, the college admissions process becomes socialized, right? Your friends are talking about it, others are talking about it. And it is best if students can, you know, just say, yeah, I'm working on my college list, or I'm preparing, what are you preparing for in terms of tests? Well, I'm trying to do some preparation. I'm mostly trying to stay focused on my classroom work. But even with your best friends, it doesn't have to be the thing to talk about. There's so many interesting topics. The most, you know, your last sport event, the school musical, whatever's, you know, going, the movie that you saw. And to talk about this too much and disclose too much, it can become part of the drama. And it's best too, from a social emotional standpoint, to try to coach your children to keep it, even with their best friends, just a low topic of conversation, so it doesn't become too much interest. There isn't unnecessary sharing of specific details. Oh, this is my #1 school that I'm interested in, and then you find out 3 of your friends are also applying to an early decision. Just kind of keep it low, keep it private, and try to navigate with grace and social emotional health, because it can become, you don't want these topics to become divisive among friends.
Someone said, if you're going to have these conversations on a Sunday night with your child, go to a restaurant. And I thought, okay, there's something there. That's a good suggestion. Someone asked about, you know, where this is available. Very kind of you. Yes, this will be on the Glenbard YouTube channel, and we'll share all of it. Michael, do you have a question from the chat?
Yeah, just Matt, any final thoughts from a student perspective? So, you know, a lot of us, you know, especially as parents, are engaging in conversations with our students about enrolling in you know, applying for college, you know, filling out college applications, taking the SAT. If I'm a student and it's currently November 9th and I'm taking the test in April, what sorts of words of wisdom do you have for me? And in what ways can you help some of our parents that are listening right now, maybe guide and shepherd a conversation with their students about the SAT coming up in April?
I think that's such a great question. I think #1, be informed with the quantitative and the qualitative. So as I was trying to point out in the presentation, get some data, a PSAT score that's already been taken, a practice ACT for free. You can take them so many places, we offer them. And then have a conversation with the data, the quantitative and the qualitative. Try to match, like, okay, this is what the data is telling us. We got to work on these things. And how did you feel about it? Well, let's make sure you get that kind of preparation. Let's make sure if you're in the class, the SAT class, you're asking the right questions, you're self-advocating. Oh, well, let's make sure you really focus on English class and school and edit your papers well, because obviously the grammar is something you have to work on. So you're having specific data informed, quantitative and qualitative, listening to your child, because they may be different from you. You were a whiz at math when you were, in high school, but your child isn't. Well, that's just how it is. I have 3 kids and they're all different from me, and they don't love the tests like I would love them all to, but I love them anyway. I'm there to support them and understand what they need. So I think try to have those not abstract conversations, but data informed and personalized around your child's qualitative experience of it. Then one more thing, there's such an opportunity for adolescents in this, because what you're doing for the first time, really, if you think about it, is you've got this, to your point, Mike, these dates, these goals that are so far off, months and months away, sometimes years away, and you've got to have a plan. And when you're adolescent, sometimes you can't see beyond your hand about this far, because that's about as much of the future as you can imagine, because you're living very much in the present. So here's an opportunity for you to have a calendar, become more organized, build executive functioning skills. How am I going to plan and organize this? When I have a break, do I want to do a little bit of more work, maybe over my break, to try to get a little bit in when I'm not distracted by my academics? Where am I going to plug it in? What am I putting in my calendar every week? So the weeks don't just go by and cascade one into the other, and next thing you know, it's April, but rather you've had an incremental plan. Now, when are we going to need that skill for planning and organizing? For the rest of our lives, to deal with goals that are uncomfortably far off, but we have to work incrementally towards them every day. Well, that's a thesis, that's a dissertation, that's a quarter performance in your business, where you've got to really focus on certain goals so that you can have a report to your board at the end of the quarter, but it's going to take daily work every day. Great learning opportunity. How am I going to organize, plan, and break this big, overwhelming thing down into bite-sized, meaningful chunks that accumulate and over time equal success? That's a life skill. It's executive planning and organizing, decision making. That's a great thing for you to look at this opportunity through that lens. You could learn, and we could learn as a family. Let's get our calendar down. Let's get our planning down. Let's prepare. So I think I always see the process itself as educational, potentially educational for the student going through it.
Last week we hosted Mimi Hamayun, who wrote the book That Crumbled Paper Was Due last week. And she talked about how the role modeling, we can so assist them in this organizational, sit down with them and understand that they probably should use a calendar for their computer files, and a calendar that's a hard copy, and sit there and really with them. And you're reminding me about the importance of role modeling, keeping this in perspective, role modeling healthy ways to deal with stress. Michael, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Matt, thank you so much for you raised an important question for us to value with our students there. And that's, how are you feeling? And we've often thought about thinking and feeling in different spheres, right? And they really exist in the same sphere. We had the privilege of having Mark Brackett in recently, author of Permission to Feel, right? And we talk about the convergence of thinking and feeling, right? And so how our students are feeling about the test and their preparation for the test is really critical to having positive outcomes and performance. So thanks so much again for being with us, Matt. Thank you for the partnership with Glenbard. We value it highly because we know that we're all on the same team, and that is the team for our students and making sure that they have the most positive outcomes possible. So it's a pleasure to see you here this evening, and thanks again. And I'll turn it back over to Gilda.
Great. Michael, thank you. So great to have you here tonight. Matt, always a pleasure. We always learn so much from you. I'm really grateful for the time. Thank you for letting me share this. Thank you for everyone that's here. And we always close by saying, go hug your kids. So have a great night, everybody. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.